Right. Before we come to the statement by the Home Secretary, I should like to say something about the House of Judice resolution. The case of Epping Forest District Council versus Simona Hotels is still active and before the courts. However, because this case concerns wider issues relating to the planning consent required for hotels to house asylum seekers, I've decided to grant a waiver so that members are free to refer to it in proceedings. However, I would remind the House that there are other active criminal prosecutions relating to disorder around the Bell Hotel and elsewhere, as well as one prosecution of an asylum seeker for alleged sexual offences. Honourable members may refer to the general issues relating to asylum accommodation, but should avoid discussing any specific criminal cases. I now call the Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will update the House on actions that we are taking with France to strengthen our border security and the next steps on our reforms to the asylum system. The House will be aware that when we came into the government, we found an asylum and immigration system in chaos. Small boat gangs for 7 years had been allowed to embed their criminal trade along the French coast. The asylum backlog was soaring and illegal working was being ignored. The previous government had lost control of the system and, as a result, opened many hundreds of asylum hotels across the country, while returns were a third lower than in 2010. And before leaving office, they deliberately cut asylum decision-making by 70%, leaving a steeply rising backlog behind. It is little wonder that people right across the country lost confidence in the system and demanded to know why they were paying the price of a system that was so out of control. But that does not mean that people rejected the long and proud history of Britain doing our bit to help those fleeing persecution or conflict, including in the past decade families from Ukraine, Syria and Hong Kong. Because it is the British way to do our bit alongside other countries to help those who need sanctuary. But the system has to be controlled and managed, based on fair and properly enforced rules, not chaos and exploitation driven by criminal smuggler gangs. And it is exactly because of our important tradition that substantial reforms are needed now. In our first year in government, we've taken immediate action, laying the foundations for more fundamental reform. We have restored asylum decision-making and then rapidly increased the rate of decisions. Had we continued with the previous government's freeze on asylum decisions, thousands more people would have been in hotels and asylum accommodation by now. Instead, we removed 35,000 people with no right to be here, including a 28% increase in returns of failed asylum seekers and a 14% increase in removals of foreign criminals. We've increased raids and arrests on illegal working by 50%, and we cut the annual hotel bill by almost £1 billion in the last financial year. We are rolling out digital ID and biometric kits so immigration enforcement can check on the spot whether someone has a right to work or a right to be in the UK. And on channel crossings and organised immigration crime, we are putting in place new powers, new structures and new international agreements to help dismantle the criminal industry behind the boats. So I want to update the House on the further steps we're now taking. In August, I signed the new treaty with France, allowing us for the first time to directly return those who arrive on small boats. The first detentions took place the next day of people immediately on arrival in Dover, and we expect the first returns to begin later this month. Applications have also been opened for the reciprocal legal route, with the first cases under consideration, subject to strict security checks. We've made clear this is a pilot scheme, but the more we prove the concept at the outset, the better we will be able to develop and grow it. But the principles it embodies are crucial, because no one should be making these dangerous or illegal journeys on small boats, and if they do, we want to see them swiftly returned.
But in return, we believe in doing our bit alongside other countries to help those who have fled persecution through managed and controlled legal programmes. This summer, we've also taken further action to strengthen enforcement against smuggling gangs. France has reviewed its maritime approach to allow for the interception of taxi boats in French waters, and we will continue to work with them to implement this change as soon as possible. In the last year, the National Crime Agency has led 347 disruptions of immigration crime networks, their highest level on record, and a 40% increase in a year. Over the summer, we announced a £100 million uplift in funding for border security and up to 300 more personnel in the National Crime Agency focusing on targeting the smuggler gangs. And the Border Security Bill will give them stronger powers, counter-terrorism powers against smuggler gangs, powers to seize and download mobile phones of small boat arrivals, and the power to ban sex offenders from the asylum system altogether. Mr. Speaker, if opposition parties work with us to speed passage through the other place instead of opposing the bill, those powers could be in place within months, making our country safer and more secure. Let me turn now to the major reforms that are needed to fix the broken asylum system that we inherited. Although we have increased decision-making and increased returns, the overall system remains sclerotic, outdated and unfair. So as we committed in the Immigration White Paper, we will shortly set out more radical reforms to modernise the asylum system and to boost our border security, tackling the pull factors, strengthening enforcement, making sure people are treated fairly, reforming the way that the ECHR is interpreted here at home, speeding up the system, cutting numbers and ending the use of hotels, and developing controlled and managed routes for genuine refugees. At the heart of these reforms will be a complete overhaul of the appeals system, the biggest obstacle to reducing the size of the asylum system and to ending hotel use. Because tens of thousands of people in asylum accommodation are currently waiting for appeals, and under the current system that figure is to grow, with an average wait time already of 54 weeks. So we have already funded thousands of additional sitting days this year, and the Border Security Bill will introduce a statutory timeframe of 24 weeks, but we need to go further. So we will introduce a new independent body to deal with immigration and asylum appeals, fully independent of government, staffed by professionally trained adjudicators with safeguards to ensure high standards, but able to surge capacity as needed to accelerate and prioritise cases, alongside new procedures to tackle repeat applications and unnecessary delays. We're also increasing detention and returns capacity, including a 1,000-bed expansion at Campsfield and Haslar, with the first tranche of additional beds coming online within months to support many thousands more in forced removals each year. And our reforms will also address the overly complex system for family migration, including changes to the way that Article 8 of the ECHR is interpreted. We should be clear, international law is important. It is because other countries know that we abide by it that we have been able to make these new agreements with France to return people who arrive on small boats, to make new agreements with Germany to stop the warehousing of small boats by criminal gangs, and to explore returns hubs partnerships with other European countries. But we also need the interpretation of international law to keep up with the realities and challenges of today's world. But there is one area where we also need to make more immediate challenges. The current rules for family reunion for refugees were designed many years ago to help families separated by war, conflict and persecution. But the way they are now being used has changed. Even just before the pandemic, refugees who applied to bring family to the UK did so on average more than 1 or 2 years after they had been granted protection, long enough for them to be able to get jobs or find housing or be able to provide their family with some support. In Denmark and Switzerland, currently those granted humanitarian protection are not able to apply to bring family for at least 2 years after protection has been granted. But here in the UK now, however, those applications come in on average in around a month after protection has been granted, often even before a newly granted refugee has left asylum accommodation. As a consequence, refugee families who arrive are far more likely to be seeking homelessness assistance. And some councils are finding that more than a quarter of their family homelessness applications are linked to refugee family reunion. That is not sustainable. Currently, there are also no conditions on family reunion for refugee sponsors, unlike those in place if the sponsor is a British citizen or a long-term UK resident, and that is not fair. Finally, the proportion of migrants who have arrived on small boats and who then apply to bring family has also increased sharply in recent years, with signs that smuggler gangs are now able to use the promise of family reunion to promote dangerous journeys to the UK. Mr. Speaker, we continue to believe that families staying together is important, and it's why we will seek to prioritise family groups among the applicants to come to Britain under our new deal with France. But reforms are needed. So in our asylum policy statement later this year, we will set out a new system for family migration, including looking at contribution requirements, longer periods before newly granted refugees can apply, and dedicated controlled arrangements for unaccompanied children and for those fleeing persecution who have family in the UK. And we aim to have some of those changes in place for the spring. But in the meantime, we do need to address the immediate pressures on local authorities and the risks from criminal gangs using family reunion as a pull factor to encourage more people onto dangerous boats. Therefore, we are bringing forward new immigration rules this week to temporarily suspend new applications under the existing dedicated refugee family reunion route. Until the new framework is introduced, refugees will be covered by the same family migration rules and conditions as everyone else. Mr. Speaker, let me turn next to the action we're taking to ensure that every asylum hotel will be closed for good under this government. Not just by shifting individuals from hotels to other sites, but by driving down the numbers in supported accommodation overall. And not in a chaotic way through piecemeal court judgments, but through a controlled, managed and orderly programme, driving down inflow into the asylum system, clearing the appeals backlog, which is crucial, and continuing to increase returns. Within the asylum estate, we are reconfiguring sites, increasing room sharing, tightening the tests for accommodation and working at pace to identify alternative, cheaper and more appropriate accommodation with other government departments and with local authorities. And we're increasing standards and security and joint public safety cooperation between the police, accommodation providers and the Home Office to ensure that laws and rules are enforced. Mr. Speaker, I understand and agree with local councils and communities who want the asylum hotels in their communities closed, because we need to close all asylum hotels and we need to do so for good. But that must be done in a controlled and orderly manner and not through a return to the previous government's chaos that led to the opening of hotels in the first place. Finally, Mr. Speaker, let me update the House on the continued legal and controlled support that we will provide for those facing conflict and persecution. We will continue to do our bit to support Ukraine, extending the Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme by a further 24 months, with further details to be set out in due course. We're also taking immediate action to rescue children who have been seriously injured in the horrendous onslaught on civilians in Gaza so they can get the health treatment they need. And the Foreign Secretary will update the House shortly on the progress to get those children out. I can confirm that the Home Office has put in place systems to issue expedited visas with biometric checks conducted prior to arrival for children and their immediate accompanying family members. And we have done the same for all the Chevening scholars and are in the process of doing so now for the next group of students from Gaza who have been awarded fully funded scholarships and places at UK universities so they can start their studies in autumn this year. And later this year, we will set out plans to establish a permanent framework for refugee students to come study in the UK so we can help more talented young people fleeing war and persecution to find a better future, alongside capped and managed ways for refugees to work here in the UK. Mr. Speaker, this government is determined to fix every aspect of the broken system we inherited and to restore the confidence of the British people. Solving problems, not exploiting them. A serious and comprehensive plan, not fantasy claims based on sums that don't add up or gimmicks that failed in the past. What we will never do is seek to stir up chaos, division or hate, because that is not who we are as a country, and that is not what Britain stands for. A practical plan to strengthen our border security, to fix the asylum chaos and to rebuild confidence in an asylum and immigration system that serves our national interest, protects our national security and reflects our national values. Because when we wave the Union flag, when we wave the St George's flag, when we sing God Save the King and celebrate everything that is great about Britain and about our country, we do so with pride because of the values that our flags, our king and our country represent. Togetherness, fairness and decency, respect for each other, respect for the rule of law. That is what our country stands for. That is the British way to fix the problems we face, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Criswell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. The government has now been in office for well over a year. And I think, I think it's fair to say not even their kindest friends would say they think it has gone very well. But listening to her statement, it sounds like she thinks everything is fine, and if there are any problems, it's all somehow somebody else's fault. Is she living in a parallel universe? After over a year in office, she must now take responsibility for what is happening under this government. Now, it's very interesting during her statement, Mr. Speaker, to notice she did not mention her favourite phrase from a year or so ago, that she was going to smash the gangs. I wonder why she was so silent on her previously favourite catchphrase. Well, the answer is it's not going very well. Now, she mentions National Crime Agency disruptions. Let me gently point out that 84% of those National Crime Agency disruptions that she cited a few minutes ago are classified as not being high impact. And if we look at National Crime Agency arrests for organised immigration crime, they actually went down by 16% in the last financial year, hardly smashing the gangs. And in fact, the NCA's arrests for organised immigration crime in that financial year were only 26, a drop in the ocean compared to the tens of thousands crossing the Channel. Now, Mr. Speaker, it was also rather conspicuous that the Home Secretary did not mention at all, not even a word, about the numbers illegally crossing the English Channel. Now, I wonder why that was. I wonder why she forgot to say a single word about that. Well, the reason, I'm afraid, is pretty clear. Because far from smashing the gangs, so far this year, 29,000, to be precise, 29,003 illegal immigrants have crossed the English Channel. That is the worst year in history, and it is up by 38% compared to last year. That is not success, it is failure. Things are not getting any better, they are getting worse. This government is failing, and everyone can see it. That is why there are protests up and down the country, and where those protests are peaceful, I support them. That is why, this is a shocking figure, 75%, let this sink in, 75% of the public think the government is handling immigration and asylum badly. 75%. Now, let me turn to hotels. Now, in the 9 months before the last general election, 200 hotels were closed down, including the Bell Hotel in Epping. But since 200 hotels closed down, but since the election, the numbers in asylum hotels have actually gone up by 8%. Now, had that previous trend of closures continued, today there would be no asylum hotels open at all. But I asked the Home Secretary to confirm this. Will she confirm that she will not reduce hotel usage simply by shunting asylum seekers from hotels and into flats and HMOs, which are desperately needed by young people? Will she give the House that categoric assurance? Now, Mr. Speaker, last week, the Home Secretary's lawyers said that the rights of illegal immigrants are more important than the rights of local people in places like Epping. And when this was expressly put in those terms to the Education Secretary yesterday on the Trevor Phillips programme, in those words, she shamefully agreed. Those statements are a disgrace. Does the Home Secretary realise how angry that makes people feel? It speaks of a government not on the side of the people in this country. It means the government appears to care more about the rights of illegal immigrants than our own citizens. So will she apologise for what her lawyers and the Education Secretary said? And will she undertake that ministers and their lawyers will never say that again? Now, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary talks about her returns deal with France. Now, it has been reported that it will only return about 50 people a week, amounting to 6% of arrivals. Does she accept that allowing 94% of illegal arrivals to stay will act as no deterrent at all? Does she accept that? And if she doesn't accept this figure of 50 a week, will she tell the House exactly how many immigrants crossing the Channel will in fact be returned under her deal? Now, she may recall that back in July, we were told by the government that the first returns would happen within weeks. That was back in July. Will she confirm to the House that the number who have actually been returned so far is precisely 0? Now, she also said to the House a couple of minutes ago that there would be security checks on those people reciprocally taken from France into the UK. But will she confirm that her agreement with France expressly says the French government will not provide the UK government with any information at all, any personal data about those migrants? So if there are criminal convictions, if there are suspicions about extremism or terrorism, the French government will not provide information to us. And if that is true, as her agreement says, how can she possibly conduct security checks? Now, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary talked about tweaks to family visa rules. Let me be clear about the opposition's position on this. If someone enters this country illegally, they should not be allowed to bring in any family members. In fact, everybody entering this country illegally should be immediately removed to their country of origin, if possible, and if not possible, to a safe third country such as Rwanda, a scheme which she cancelled just days before it was due to start. The public expects that approach. The public expects that approach, an approach which she cancelled because the numbers crossing the Channel so far this year have been the worst ever, the worst in history. And it's not just the numbers are high. Hundreds of migrants having crossed, living in those hotels, have been charged with criminal offences, including sexual assaults on girls as young as 8 years old and multiple rapes. This is not just a border security crisis, it is a public safety crisis as well, and people up and down this country are furious. That is why they are protesting, and that is why 75% of the public think this government is failing on asylum and immigration. Now, if this government were serious about fixing this problem, they would know that little tweaks here and there are not enough. Tweaks to Article 8 are not going to be enough. Tweaking the family reunion rules are not enough. Returning, maybe if we're lucky, 50 people a week to France is not going to be enough. Maybe intercepting a few boats, worthy though that is, it is not going to be enough. The only way these crossings will stop, the only way we're going to get control of our borders back, is if everybody crossing the Channel knows they will get returned. Now, we tabled a bill to do that in Parliament a few weeks ago. We had a plan to do that, the Rwanda bill. We need to go further by disapplying the Human Rights Act, not just tinkering with Article 8, disapplying the entire Human Rights Act from immigration matters. If the government was serious, that is what they will do. So I have one last question for the Home Secretary. If she really wants to control our borders, if she really wants to get down the record numbers that have been crossing on her watch, she would back our plan, she would disapply the Human Rights Act in its entirety from immigration matters, and she would ensure that every single person crossing the Channel was immediately removed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do worry about the Shadow Home Secretary's amnesia. And the 14 years that his party was in government, in which they never managed to do any of the fantasy things that he claims. So coming back to the reality rather than the fantasy rhetoric that he said. He talked about the approach that his previous government was taking before the election. So it's worth reminding the House of what that approach was. Asylum decisions dropped by 70%. They effectively had a freeze on taking asylum decisions, and they were returning those asylum seekers nowhere. Not to France, not to the safe countries that people had passed through, not to Rwanda. Despite running the scheme for more than 2 years, only 4 volunteers went at a cost of £700 million. Their approach left us with a backlog that was soaring. And had we continued with that totally failed approach, not taking asylum decisions, not returning people anywhere, there would have been tens of thousands more people in asylum accommodation, in asylum hotels across the country right now. That is the kind of chaos that his policies were heading towards, and that is the kind of chaos that he is promising again now. The House will remember his personal record, obviously, where small boat arrivals went up tenfold on his watch when he was an immigration minister, and where the less than 1,000 asylum seekers were in hotels by the time he became immigration minister, more than 20,000 by the time that he left. And his new concern for local councils, well, he was the immigration minister who actually wrote to local authorities to tell them he was stopping the requirement for local authorities to agree to accommodation, saying, I have instead authorised providers to identify any suitable properties that they consider appropriate. So, Mr. Speaker, we agree with communities across the country that asylum hotels must all close. And I understand too why councils individually want to take action in their area. But I would say to the Shadow Home Secretary, a party that wants to be in government should have a proper plan for the whole country, not just promote a chaotic approach that ends up making it worse in lots of areas. But that actually is their record. The reason that we have asylum hotels in the first place is because they did no planning. They let Manston chaos get out of control, and both the Shadow Justice Minister, when he was an immigration minister, as well as the Shadow Home Secretary, rushed around the country opening hotels instead of taking a practical, steady approach that gets to the heart of the problem, that reduces the asylum system, that strengthens our border security and tackles and reforms the appeals that are causing the huge delays now. And as the final point, Mr. Speaker, this government strongly believes that sex offenders should be banned from the asylum system altogether. That is why we have put those details into the Border Security Bill, a bill that his party has voted against time and again, is still resisting in the House of Lords, a bill which, if opposition parties supported us and worked with us, we could have that law on the statute book. We could have those stronger powers against sex offenders. We could have the stronger powers on counter-terrorism powers to go after criminal gangs. We could have the stronger powers in place to tackle the offences that are being committed in the Channel and across the country as well. The trouble is, what the party opposite is doing in opposition is actually an even worse version of what they did in government, ramping up the rhetoric with policies that would just make the chaos worse. This government will fix the chaos that we inherited and strengthen our border security for the sake of the whole country.
Judy Gosling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks, Secretary of State, for everything which has been revealed today, which will make a difference. I would like to ask, however, as we move from hotels into community distribution, how we can ensure that there is sufficient vetting and transparency in the asylum dispersal, especially for groups known to be high risk, in order to safeguard our residents, restore faith in our communities and prevent disorder and the threats of disorder, as we've seen in Nuneaton this summer.
My honourable friend makes a really important point, and anyone who comes to our country needs to abide by our laws. The rules need to be enforced, and we also believe that new partnership and stronger measures are needed between policing and immigration enforcement and the Home Office as well, around making sure that there are proper public safety plans around the asylum estate. We are drawing up new arrangements, including stronger checks at the border, but also stronger arrangements in local communities as well, and I recognise the important points that she is making.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Much, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful, as I always am, to the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. Anyone with any sense knows that the Conservatives trashed our asylum system and left the backlog spiralling out of control, with applications for asylum routinely taking years to process. Some of the Home Secretary's remarks are indeed welcome, but I worry, Mr Speaker, that this government risks repeating some of the same mistakes. The Liberal Democrats will closely scrutinise the plan that the Home Secretary has talked of today, but given that the Home Office itself says one of the reasons those human beings seeking asylum make dangerous small boat crossings is the lack of safe alternative family reunion routes, cutting these back further seems counterproductive, especially when over half of those who were granted family reunion visas in the year ending June 2025 were children under 18. It's right that the government has increased the rate of decisions. Those with no right to be here should be sent back swiftly, and those who do have a valid claim should be able to settle, work, integrate and contribute to our communities. The backlog is still too large. Initial application decisions are still taking too long. And as the Home Secretary stated, a significant share of the backlog comes from appeals. According to the government's own figures, in 2024, almost half of rejected asylum applications were overturned on appeal. And for applications from high-grant countries, that proportion was even higher. So I'd welcome clarity from the Home Secretary on how long it's currently taking to process the average asylum application and what concrete steps are being taken to ensure not only that cases are processed more swiftly, but that decisions are right the first time. So applications are not left in limbo, the courts are not overburdened, and taxpayers are not footing the bill for avoidable delays. I welcome the Home Secretary's encouraging comments about the reciprocal agreement with France. Could she confirm whether the government plans for this to be scaled up, and if so, when? Given that one of the main drivers of dangerous channel crossings is the absence of safe, legal family reunion routes, does the Home Secretary agree that cutting family reunion rules actually risks making the small boat crisis worse, not better? The Home Secretary rightly also mentioned the impact on local authorities. When individuals leave hotels, many present as homeless, creating an unsustainable burden on councils, including my own. Could the Home Secretary explain how she's working with MHCLG to support councils and ensure that this crisis is not simply shifted from one overstretched system to another? Mr Speaker, constituents have been in touch with me as they're concerned in recent weeks about the number of flags that have gone up on lampposts around our area. They worry that they've been put up by those who seek to divide our community, not bring it together. Patriotism is a good thing. We should be proud of our country. We should be proud that our country welcomed people like my nan in the 1930s when she was fleeing the Nazis. We should be proud of the record we have of doing our bit. We should be proud of the British values I see in action across my community every day. I am proud of those police officers who kept everyone safe during the protests at 2 hotels in my constituency over the summer. Proud of those teachers and pupils who welcome new classmates when they've been placed in one of the hotels. And I am really proud of those who volunteer their time to support new arrivals, whether through local churches or other voluntary groups and charities, because, Mr Speaker, that's what patriotism looks like.
Yeah.
Can I thank the honourable member for her remarks and questions? And what I would say to her is, obviously, at the heart of the France pilot that we have developed is the principle that those who are arriving on dangerous and illegal small boats should be returned. But we should also have, alongside that, in return, the legal route for those who apply, who go through proper security checks. And we will seek to prioritise, as part of that, people who have a connection to the UK, for example, also prioritising family groups, people who have family connections to the UK. And family will continue to need to be an underpinning part of the approach. It's, for example, why you will recall the Ukraine Family Scheme was an important part of the response to Ukraine, and something that from opposition the Labour Party called for as well. But what I would say to you about the family reunion arrangements that we have at the moment is they're being used in a very different way compared to 5 years ago. And the way in which the number of people who are applying immediately before they have a job, before they have a house, before they have any way of being able to support their families, and instead, as a result, are increasing the homelessness pressures on local authorities at a time when we need local authorities not just to be able to do their bit to be able to help clear hotels, but also, crucially, to be able to provide homelessness support in the local community. And that is why making sure that the refugee arrangements around families actually doesn't put that additional pressure on the homelessness system, I think, is important. That's why we will set out reforms, and we will ensure that in the interim the refugees are included under the existing arrangements that apply to everybody, to all sponsors in the UK for family reunion as well. On the appeals issue, we obviously need to speed it up. The average appeal time is now 54 weeks. That is far too long, but also some appeals go on for way longer than that, and we have people who are in asylum accommodation for years with repeat appeals. That is preventing the closure of asylum hotels that needs to take place, and it's why we need the reforms. Finally, I would say to you, raises the issues on flags. I strongly support the flags across the country. With the St George's flag, we fly in Pontefract Castle each year. The Union Jack, she will know, is on the Labour Party's membership card, and show her a copy if she hasn't seen it as well. But those flags are the embodiment, as I said as well. The flags are an embodiment of, it should be the ways of bringing our country together, and that will be the same for Scotland, the same in Wales, the same in Northern Ireland too. They are the ways of, through symbolism, the ways to bring our country together.
Murray.
Mr. Speaker, a couple of years ago, I was working in local government in Scotland trying to deal with the impact of asylum hotels. The Shadow Home Secretary at the time was in the Home Office, and he opened hotel after hotel without even telling councils that that was happening. So his amnesia today is staggering. 5 years ago, we didn't have asylum hotels. The reason we do now is because the last government signed a contract with private providers that has cost billions and is not just putting pressure on communities, it is a procurement scandal as well. Will the Home Secretary commit to reading the Home Affairs report that we are about to publish on this issue, and to looking as creatively as she can at managing these asylum contacts to get the best deal for the taxpayer?
Well, I do look forward to reading the Home Affairs Select Committee's report, and I thank him for his work on the Home Affairs Select Committee. We've already been working to get better value out of the contracts that we inherited. It's one of the reasons why we have saved nearly £1 billion on the asylum accommodation costs, even just since the election. But he's also right to point out part of the reason what happened was the previous government completely lost control of the system in 2022, and how we had the total lack of planning, total lack of any grit, the chaos around Manston, incredibly costly, and this sudden surge of opening asylum hotels all over the country with really poor contracting, really poor value for money, that was really bad for the taxpayer, as well as really damaging in terms of having an effective system across the country as well. We cannot go back to that kind of chaos.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Home Secretary, please. We have a tinderbox situation in Epping. We have the Bell Hotel with alleged sexual and physical assaults, and now twice weekly major protests, some of which became violent with injuries to police officers. Appallingly, last week, the government successfully appealed against the injunction on the hotel, prioritising the rights of illegal migrants over the rights and indeed safety of the people of Epping. Our community, Mr. Speaker, is in distress. The situation is untenable. This week, the schools are back. The hotel is in the wrong place, right near a school, and many concerned parents have contacted me. When will the Home Secretary and the government listen to us, address this issue, and do the right and safe thing and close the Bell Hotel immediately?
So, Mr. Speaker, I agree that all asylum hotels need to be closed as swiftly as possible, including the Bell Hotel. It needs to be done in an orderly and sustainable manner so that they are closed for good. And he is not right in the characterisation of the government's case, because what we are clear about is that all asylum hotels need to close. We need to make sure that it is done in an ordered way that doesn't simply make the problem worse in other neighbouring areas or simply cause the kind of disordered chaos that led to the opening of so many hotels in the first place. We also need to strengthen the security and the cooperation with policing, and we want to strengthen the law on asylum seekers who commit offences that can be banned from the system, and that will be part of our border security bill as well.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was Orwell who urged us to be proud of our countries and call out the nationalists trying to demand that we express our pride or be called traitors accordingly. So let's be proud of this country and the work it has done to support people fleeing persecution. Let us be proud of what we have done to help families from Ukraine and Hong Kong. And in that vein, can the Home Secretary, who I know recognises that safe and legal routes for refugee children to be reunited with their parents is something we should be proud of, clarify that if there is going to be a delay in providing those safe and legal routes, it will apply to all children, including Ukrainian children? Or are we actually going to recognise that helping children so they don't face the penalties that we want to see put to their parents is the best and most proudest thing we can do of all?
Well, my honourable friend makes important points, and we will look as part of the new arrangements that we set out, which will include both the stronger border security, both the reforms to the asylum system to make it more controlled and managed and to reduce the size, but also to have the controlled and managed legal routes, and that needs to include arrangements for family and also dedicated arrangements around unaccompanied children, because she is right to raise that as a serious issue. Obviously, for Ukraine, we have a separate dedicated scheme for Ukraine. We are continuing with that scheme. And as the point that she makes about we should recognise, I think people do across the country continue to support that. And having spoken to Ukrainian mums who describe how they fled in the first few weeks of Putin's invasion, knowing that their home villages had been overrun by Russian troops and not knowing whether other family members were safe or whether they would ever be able to return again, we should remember always what it is that people can be fleeing from and the importance of countries working together to support them.
Esther McBain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Home Secretary believe the rights of the people coming over the channel in dinghies should take precedence over the rights of local residents in places like Epping, as her lawyers argued for in court and as the Education Secretary said in an interview at the weekend?
No, that is wrong, and that is wrong about the government's position, and the government has made clear that all asylum hotels need to close. They need to do so in an orderly manner that does not end up increasing the problems in other areas. We need to close the hotels for the whole country, and the judge himself has said that this is not about a hierarchy of rights.
Rinda Jess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am very glad that the Home Secretary has acknowledged that, like other countries, we do have a duty to safeguard those fleeing persecution and seeking sanctuary in Britain. But the reason why we had 400 asylum hotels back in 2023 at a cost of £9 million a day, and why we have just over 200, is because the party opposite failed to deal with asylum claim applications, which this country and this government is now doing. And if there's any government that will end the use of hotels for asylum seekers, it is this Labour government.
I welcome my honourable friend's points. We need the consistent, practical plans that will close hotels right across the country, clearing the appeals backlog, which otherwise would grow, preventing the increase in asylum claims in the first place, but also the restarting of decisions as well, because had we carried on with that freeze on asylum decisions that the previous government left us with, there would have been tens of thousands more people in hotels across the country right now. That would have been deeply wrong.
Stefan Curran.
Speaker, people with a wide range of views about how to tackle immigration spoke to me over the summer. None of them are happy with how things are. They're furious with how the Conservatives trashed our border security, and they certainly don't want the harebrained schemes of reform. They want action that fixes the system fast. After years of failure, will the Home Secretary finally make sure that our immigration system keeps out people who would come here for the wrong reasons while properly supporting those who need our help?
Yes, we need to strengthen our border security, and that is why the Border Security and Asylum Bill, currently passing through the other place, includes the ability to use counter-terrorism powers against criminal smuggler gangs. Those are crucial. We need to strengthen the work of the National Crime Agency to go after those gangs, because they are pursuing a vile trade in human lives.
Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't envy the Home Secretary trying to clear up the mess that the last government left on migration. I doubt, however, that the measures she's putting before the House at the present time will be as successful as she and I would wish them to be. They don't really deal with the fact that many migrants are not coming from war-torn countries. They're coming from France, which is not persecuting them in any recognisable form. The reason is demand pull from this country, which migrants believe they will have a better time and an easier time and get through the system more easily than they would in France and other European countries. Denmark has been successful in reducing the demand pull. If these measures aren't as successful as she would wish them to be, will she look more closely at what Denmark has done to improve the situation?
So he's right to say that obviously small boats are mainly setting off from France. People have travelled through France, but that is exactly why we have negotiated the pilot agreement with France to be able to return people back to France. The first time that this has happened, something previous governments tried and completely failed to do. It's important we do that and we build on that, but we also need to tackle some of those pull factors, particularly around illegal working. That's why we've had a 50% increase in illegal raids and arrests, and also to recognise that the family reunion issue is being used by some of those criminal gangs as well. And that is one of the things that Denmark has done, which is to increase the time before refugees can apply for family reunion so that they are more likely to be working, more likely to be supporting their families, and so that we have they prevent criminal gangs being able to use it as a pull factor.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Home Secretary has spoken about tweaks to the rules and regulations, potentially to interpretation of the law. The problem with that, of course, is that our courts will also interpret the law and may, in fact, go against what the Home Secretary wants to do. Yeah. So will she set out what changes to the law she will introduce to actually make sure that we stop the illegal migrants coming to this country?
Well, I do agree with him we need to change the law. So first, obviously, we have the Border Security and Asylum Bill, which is bringing in a whole series of changes around counter-terrorism powers, around banning sex offenders from the asylum system, around a new offence on endangerment. But we also believe that new legal changes are going to be needed to the asylum system. We will bring forward further legislation in order to do that, and we will set out later this year detailed reforms, not just on appeals, but more widely around the asylum system in order to be able to tackle some of both the historic chaos and also the delays in the system to get the system back under control.
Sally James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As many are aware, there is a number of well-known delivery companies and other companies, in fact, who are employing asylum seekers with no right to work, and this is helping to incentivise the boat crossings and ultimately undermine our national security. So will the Home Secretary liaise with the Treasury before the budget to discuss bringing a windfall tax on some of these delivery companies so they can start contributing to the cost of a problem that they are helping to exacerbate?
Yeah. Well, my honourable friend raises an important point about the gig economy and needing to ensure that the gig economy does not become rife for abuse and misuse around illegal working. That is why we are bringing in, again, in the Border Security Bill, which unfortunately opposition parties, the Conservatives and Reform, have continued to vote against, but bringing in that bill the requirements for employers in the gig economy to also abide by the checks on illegal working, and it's why we've also signed recently a new agreement with some of the major delivery companies to share information so that we can target abuse and crime.
Pete Wishart.
What a country the UK is becoming, and rarely has the national mood been so ugly and intimidating. People congregating at hotels, screaming at asylum seekers to go home. The right wing so emboldened that they feel the streets belong to them. Doesn't she realise every time she moves onto the ground of reform, all she's doing is further encouraging and emboldening them? How about trying something different? How about just occasionally saying something positive about immigration? How about not dehumanising asylum seekers and showing them some compassion, decency and humanity?
Yeah. Well, I would just point out to the honourable member that I have spoken about Ukrainian mums and the experiences that they had fleeing from Putin. I have spoken about the students in Gaza who currently can't take up their places and who we are working to do expedited visas so that they can pursue a better future, and the importance of having a proper legal and controlled routes as part of an effective system, and that has been part of our history. But we also have to have a system that is properly controlled and managed. We also have to have a system that is not open to abuse and misuse and exploitation by criminal gangs. And we also have to have stronger border security so that it is government and not gangs that chooses who to come to our country.
Dave Maghillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Home Secretary's statement. A lot to unpick, including more detail on this new appeals system. But one of the key concerns when I was in the Home Office many years ago was that the poor legal advice that people were getting early on and the lawyers who were putting them through many hopeless loops to extend their stay unnecessarily, putting them in a miserable situation, costing the taxpayer and creating chaos and duplication in the system. Is she looking at what legal advice people will get at an early stage so that those appeals and processes can be expedited?
Margaret, I know, is former Home Office Minister, has a lot of experience in dealing with issues around immigration cases as well, and some of the real concerns around some of both the advice that people are given, decisions, the way in which decisions are made. We are strengthening some of the regulation issues and some of the ways in which the system works around legal advice as part of the Border and Security Bill, and I'd be happy to talk to her about this issue further.
Lincoln John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my Spelthorne constituency in Stanwell, we have the Stanwell Hotel, which is being used to house asylum seekers. I wrote to Home Office ministers on the 24th of July, again on the 25th of July, and again on the 29th of July, and I have had zero responses to any of those letters. So please, will the Home Secretary show some respect to my constituents and the people of Spelthorne and reply to their questions and concerns?
Well, I will ensure that the honourable member gets a written response to his questions, but let me also make clear that all asylum hotels, including the hotel in his constituency, need to close. They need to do so in an orderly manner, and they need to do so in a way that doesn't make the problem worse elsewhere or create more chaos, as we have seen in the past. That is the best way for us to reduce the size of the asylum system, to clear all of the backlogs, and to make sure that we have an effective system in place.
Alistair Trapper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ECHR is an important bedrock, not just for protecting vulnerable people's rights here in the UK, but also our strong international relationships abroad, which have been crucial not just to securing that returns deal with France, but also cooperation with Germany and other European partners to finally clamp down on the dire scourge of people smuggling gangs that we inherited. So leaving it fully cannot be a solution to the problems. It doesn't, though, mean that every aspect of it is currently working in the right way, and it's clear it's currently standing in the way of some of the actions we need to take if we're going to take this issue seriously. So can I welcome the clarification of how we're looking to take forward interpretation of Article 8 from the Home Secretary today, and can I seek confirmation from her that we won't shy away from further clarifications like the one announced today, where the EHRC is currently getting in the way of the action we know we need to take to provide the border security our country is crying out for.
Well, my honourable friend is right to talk about the international law and ECHR being parts of the reasons that we've been able to get international agreements, because other countries know that we will abide by international law. That is how we have got the French pilot in place in the first place, something that the previous government was repeatedly unable to do. But the way in which it is interpreted is significant and does need to keep up to date. We have the challenge around Article 8 and family cases, that far too many cases are being treated as exceptions to the rules rather than according to the rules that Parliament has set. We think the rules need to change in order to be able to address that, and we need to work through different changes to the way in which Article 8 in particular is interpreted as part of our immigration and asylum system, and we will set out more details on that as part of our asylum reform package that we will set out later this year.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every time the Home Secretary announces a new policy on illegal migration actually goes up. So I think a period of silence would be most welcome from the Home Secretary. But does she agree with me that the only way to stop the pull factor is to detain, deport and never allow these illegal migrants to claim asylum in this country?
Well, the pilot scheme we have agreed with France involves being able to detain people on arrival in Dover for the first time, something that's not happened before, and then to be able to return them to France, to the place where the boats set off from. This is something that previous government, including the government that he supported and was part of, were unable to agree and unable to achieve. And we have increased returns of failed asylum seekers by nearly 30% just since the election alone, because we believe that the rules need to be enforced and also that returns need to be increased as well. The problem with his party's approach is, frankly, he sounds a lot like the last Tory government's promises, grand promises that totally failed. They're just rehashing the same chaotic promises without ever being able to provide the detail of how they would make any of their policies work. The British way is to roll up our sleeves and to do things in a practical way, to increase returns and to sort the problems out.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Home Secretary's statement, she has stated that she will never seek to stir up chaos, hatred and division. Yes, that's what we've seen this summer, with the far right emboldened because of racism and demonisation in the media and from politicians. And instead of scapegoating refugees and asylum seekers, maybe the Home Secretary needs to be thinking about more humane policies, including safe route, employment and right to remain. So can you explain whether these policies have and will be considered?
Well, what I say to my friend is that part of the French pilot scheme involves people who apply lawfully to come to the UK and go through proper security checks, being able to do so on a one-for-one basis with those being returned who have arrived on dangerous small boats in the hands of criminal gangs. We've also set out, as part of the statement I've just made, our intention to have a permanent framework for refugee students to be able to come to the UK rather than the ad hoc approach that we are currently applying to Gaza students, but we think there needs to be a more systematic approach as well as the captain-controlled approaches to other refugee work programmes as well. That has to be alongside the better controls and management of the existing system, which has become chaotic, where there are long delays and where we have had the undermining of our border security by criminal gangs. We have to do those things together, and we have to do so in a way that pulls our country together rather than see division and tension continue.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Reform announced in the summer that they would house all asylum seekers in former RAF bases. In my constituency, RAF Linton on Ouse was ruled out for inappropriateness of its location in the small village around it. Can I ask the Home Secretary to confirm that she has no plans to reverse that decision to rule out those inappropriate RAF bases?
Well, we clearly don't want asylum accommodation in inappropriate places. What we have to do is to reduce the overall size of the asylum system alongside making sure that we can move, where possible, to alternative and better sites from hotels as well. But I think if any system that just simply looks at expanding the asylum system, as happens if you have a freeze on asylum decisions and some of the policies that unfortunately Reform are pursuing that risk increasing the number of people stuck in the asylum system as well because they do not have the plans for practical returns, that simply makes the problem worse rather than the practical changes that we need to bring the numbers down.
Laurie Gardner.
It's come to my attention, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the job of Home Secretary is one that does not always attract the greatest thanks in government. So I want to thank her this afternoon for the response that she and her department has given to the letter from 100 colleagues on the Gaza students and for what she said this afternoon about looking at a permanent scheme. Could she also confirm to the House, though, that these visas, when they are issued, will be the same as any international student's visa, in that the students, the scholars, will be able to bring their families, their dependents with them?
Well, the honourable member will know that for many student visas actually do not allow for bringing dependents to the UK. There will be exceptional circumstances for the particular circumstances around Gaza, but overall the approach to student visas across the board for the particularly things like the master's courses and so on is not to include dependents. We do, however, want to make sure that we can have the refugee route for students, which does recognise that there will be some people who can come, who can get education in UK universities, develop their incredible talents, and then will want to return to their home countries in future to rebuild their countries. There may be others who are also not able to return because that is the nature of the crisis we face.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In her statement, the Home Secretary mentioned that the National Crime Agency has disrupted 347 immigration crime networks. Could she say in that same time period how many gangs have been smashed?
Well, many of those disruptions are exactly about pursuing gangs, and also there are some of those disruptions, over 40 of the disruptions include some very high profile and high value disruptions as well, disruptions which the National Crime Agency has itself said are having a significant impact on degrading, undermining and stopping the criminal gangs. And some of the coordinated arrests with France and with Germany are also preventing a criminal gang activity, including taking out some of the leaders of those criminal gangs.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is it any wonder that an honourable member opposite described the Shadow Home Secretary's asylum policy as silly when it was the Conservative government which failed to process claims, filled up hotels, left people in limbo, and broke the bank in the process, just as it broke the bank on everything that it touched. Opening asylum hotels did not happen on our watch. We want to shut them. Asylum hotels did not happen on our watch. We want to shut them. We want to save the public purse significant sums of money. We want to get this system right. Will the Home Secretary tell the people of Bournemouth East that I represent how she is speeding up that process of closing asylum hotels here in Bournemouth and in Britain?
Commander for Friend is right. We need to end asylum hotels across the board. That means making sure that we can clear the appeals backlog through major appeals reform, because that is currently the biggest cause preventing faster closure of hotels at the moment. It means also preventing people taking up accommodation in the first place when they should not be entitled to, and it means looking for alternative sites where they are more appropriate, including working with other government departments in order to be able to do so. But it also crucially means recognising that the system that we inherited, if we had carried on with that, not taking asylum decisions, just this frozen system, which the previous government was not returning people and they were not taking asylum decisions, that would have left us with tens of thousands more people in asylum hotels. That is the system that they want to go back to. That would be deeply damaging for his constituents and for the country.
Tim Farron.
Madam Deputy Speaker, providing safer routes for refugees is not going to eradicate the entire problem. None of us are saying that it is, but it's surely part of the solution to stopping trafficking across the Channel. So isn't it just cruel madness to restrict family reunion, one of the few safe routes that actually currently exist, particularly when we know that 93% of refugee family reunion visas this year were to 93% to women and children? Won't this increase the number of people putting themselves at the mercy of evil traffickers? Won't this increase the number of tragedies in the Channel?
So I know that this is an issue that the Honourable Member has taken a very strong interest in over a long period of time. What I would say to him is that since he and I think, probably first started discussing this issue many years ago, the way in which the family reunion system is being used has changed. And so it has gone from people applying after they had had refugee protection here in the UK for maybe a year or 2 years to applying in around a month. And that means that those people applying have often not left asylum accommodation or asylum hotels. They don't have housing, they don't have jobs, they don't have ways in which to support family members who they seek to bring to the UK. And we've also seen issues around risks that criminal gangs are using it and exploiting it. That is why we are temporarily pausing the existing refugee family reunion, and we'll be consulting on what are the new arrangements that should be brought in, that we would aim to bring in some of those arrangements by this spring. In the interim, the refugees will be covered by exactly the same rules as everyone else and the same conditions as everyone else through the Appendix FM process. But there is a concern where there are no conditions at the moment on refugee family reunion. The way in which it's being used has changed, and there is a responsibility on us to not have huge problems on homelessness assistance for local authorities, to have a managed system that also supports contributions and doesn't simply end up being exploited by criminal gangs.
Debbie Abrahams. Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I recognise the complexity of the issues that she's facing. I was very struck with Lord Dubbs on the radio this morning when he was describing his own personal circumstances. His father left Prague as soon as the Nazis invaded in 1939. He got Kinder Transport, one of the last ones out, and his mother followed a few months later. That's not the year's timetable that we've talked about in terms of the parity of the scheme. So perhaps there needs to be an Alf Dubbs test that would make sure that families facing the similar sort of circumstances where their lives are in jeopardy would be protected. He also mentioned about ensuring that people understood why people flee as refugees. The conflation between economic migrants and refugees is frankly very unhelpful. Secretary.
Can I recognise the important points that my honourable friend made, and also the work that Lord Dubs has done over many years, and particularly to champion unaccompanied child refugees. And we have recognised there will need to be dedicated arrangements that recognise the particular plight of unaccompanied child refugees. But I think this needs to be done in a properly controlled and managed way, which actually it hasn't been for a long time. To do that through a controlled and managed way. There are always, under the existing systems that will apply to everyone in the meantime through the next 6 months while we bring in the new arrangements for the future, there are always provisions for exceptional circumstances, but what we need to do is to prevent the system that we have at the moment, which is pushing significant pressure on homelessness for local authorities and also is being exploited by criminal gangs.
Sir Desmond Swearing.
The only effective measure of the government's actions are the number of crossings, aren't they?
Well, I would say there's a big problem with the small boats, which where we've seen the criminal gangs change their tactics, particularly to exploit the French rules, which mean that up until now France has not been intervening in French waters, but also not just that, but also people who are claiming as a result of coming to the end of their visa, having come to the UK lawfully, and then claim asylum when nothing else has changed in their country. And we need to make sure that there are tighter rules around that, as well as action around the border security to prevent dangerous boat crossings that undermine security and also put lives at risk.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency, like Britain as a whole, has long been home to people of all faiths and cultures who came here or whose forebearers came here from all around the world. And over the summer, we've seen the growth of ugly rhetoric, including the term Indigenous Britons. And this risks a culture of fear in many of our communities. So what is the government doing to address this insidious trend?
Madam Secretary.
My friend makes a really important point, because ours is a country that has been strengthened through very many generations, people coming to our shores from all over the world to work, to reunite with family, to be part of communities, to set up businesses, to be part of our public services, particularly our National Health Service, and have done so through generation after generation. That is an important part of our country and will continue to be so for the future. We have had long debates about how the immigration system, of course, needs to be controlled and managed, but also how we recognise the need for our country to come together. Whatever people's history, whatever people's family history, for people to be able to come together and be proud of the country that Great Britain is, not to be divided, not to pursue hatred, and not to pit people against each other.
Carla Denyer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our communities are divided and they are scared. We, all of us, want to be with our families, and communities are at their strongest when family life is protected and supported. If the Secretary of State lifted the ban on asylum seekers working, she would be giving those who subsequently achieve refugee status a stronger footing to support their families and be ready to join our communities and not need to seek that homelessness relief that she mentions. So, instead of keeping children and their families apart, why doesn't she help families to support themselves?
Madam Secretary.
Well, I know that the honourable member will be as concerned as I am about the lives at risk in the small boat crossings, and we do have to do everything that we can to prevent those dangerous boat crossings, including seeing families on those boat crossings as well. But part of what the criminal gangs do, part of their sell, is to claim that it will be really easy to work, and that is work illegally, in the UK, but that is part of their pitch. It's one of the reasons why it's so important that we tackle the illegal working, because it's that promise of being able to work easily, being able to get income, that is one of the things that the criminal gangs exploit in order to get a lot of people to part with their money and to get involved in what is this criminal gang's vile trade.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was struck by the comments of my honourable friend, the member for Hackney South, about the importance of good and appropriate legal advice to people seeking immigration status in the UK. And I recall 2 cases that I have where constituents have been very badly let down by the solicitors, 2 cases I've brought to the attention of the Home Secretary's Department. So, given that justice is devolved to the Scottish Government, when changes are being made to regulation around this issue, will the Home Secretary commit to discussing this with the Scottish Government and, if necessary, with the Law Council of Scotland?
I welcome the points that my honourable friend makes, because we need to make sure that on the issues around legal advice around migration, because obviously immigration is not a devolved issue. Therefore, there need to be high standards around legal advice right across the country. We obviously have those discussions with all of the devolved administrations, and will continue to do so as the Border and Security Bill passes through the Parliament.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Home Secretary set out how many migrants will be returned to France over the coming 12 months?
Home Secretary.
Well, we have set out that this is a pilot, and we want to build and grow it. There is no cap on the overall numbers to go as part of the pilot, and we need to build it as we go. What we've also said is that we won't set out the kinds of operational details that criminal gangs will simply use and manipulate along the way, but we will provide updates as each month goes by on the progress of the scheme. I think it's important for 2 ways. First of all, because it is the basis from which we can then expand and to actually be able to return people to France and undermine the model of the criminal gangs. But this is also underpinning this is a fairness principle, which is if you arrive on a dangerous, illegal small boat and you pay a criminal gang, actually you should be returned, but we should do our bit alongside other countries to help those who apply through a legal route and go through proper security checks.
Jessica Tarr.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This summer, my community in Bournemouth West has been deeply divided by misinformation about asylum hotels and local crime rates. This has been exploited by parts of the national media and, frankly, Conservative and Reform politicians and local activist groups as well, seeking simply to stoke fear. I, like everyone on this side of the House, stood on a manifesto to end hotel use.
Yeah.
So can I thank the Home Secretary for getting on with the job of restoring order to our asylum system to address the chaos left by the last government? And can she give my constituents reassurance that we remain committed to tackling the vile organised crime gangs that drive the boats, to clearing the asylum backlog, to give those who are seeking asylum the chance to restore their lives here and give them certainty, and also to ending hotel use in communities like mine and across the country?
Home Secretary.
Well, we have obviously, as my honourable friend said, made clear in our manifesto, we will end asylum hotel use. We need to put an end to the asylum hotel use right across the country, to do so in an orderly way. We also need to make sure that the rules are properly enforced, that laws are properly respected, and we will strengthen the law. And that is why the Border Security Bill, for example, bans sex offenders from the asylum system. It strengthens counter-terrorism powers to go after the criminal gangs. And it does so in a way that it is astonishing, frankly, that the parties opposite, the Conservatives and Reform Party, just refuse to support when we need those laws in place as rapidly as possible. And we will do so alongside ensuring that there are proper, controlled and managed legal ways to support refugees, as our country has always done, because that is a proud part of our history.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Past waves of refugees who came to this country quite rightly had to identify themselves and come here legally. What percentage does the Home Secretary think of people who arrive illegally by small boats do so having torn up their identification documents And should such people ever be granted asylum?
Firm Secretary.
Well, the honourable member will know that obviously there are different identity checks as part of the asylum system, that those are tested as well through the courts, and one of the things that is one of the reasons why cases, asylum claims can be turned down is if there is a lack of credibility in the application that is put in, and that can be a lack of credibility because of concerns about deliberately lost documents, for example, or not having proper identity information. It's important that we do that. That's why we're also increasing the digital ID and biometric checks as part of the ways to prevent illegal working and linking that back to the biometric asylum system as well.
Alex Baker.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Illegal working not only undermines the integrity of our immigration system, it also erodes trust in our communities. In Aldershot, constituents have raised concerns about people continuing to work illegally even after reports have been made to the Home Office. That risks leaving local people feeling that the system is neither fair nor properly enforced. I welcome that the Home Office illegal working rates are up 50%, but can the Minister update the House on what action the Government is taking to strengthen enforcement and how the Home Office is ensuring that reports made are acted on swiftly so that trust in our communities can be maintained?
Madam Secretary.
Well, Honourable Friend makes an important point, and we have increased illegal working arrests and raids by 50%. We've significantly increased the fines for employers who are engaged in illegal working. But the further thing we are doing is, as part of the organised immigration crime domestic task force, bringing together policing here in the UK, that one of the things it is looking at is the way that organised immigration crime networks are also linked into organised crime here in the UK and also the exploitation of illegal workers. So going after some of those employers, some of those who are operating bogus tactics alongside the existing raids.
Christine Jardine.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And actually, can I welcome the Home Secretary's confirmation in her statement of the expedited visas for students, particularly those from Gaza. I've written to both the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary this summer, appealing for exactly this move, and I know how welcome it will be to those students. But I wonder if I could also ask her, she talks about a capped work scheme. We talk a lot about the pressure on local authorities and the cost to the taxpayer. Would she not agree with me that if we could give asylum seekers the right to work, pay national insurance, tax and contribute, they would then be carrying their own burden and there would no longer be a weight on the taxpayer?
Secretary.
Well, can I welcome the campaigning she has done to support students in Gaza, because it is horrendous, the situation that we're seeing. The Foreign Secretary will shortly make a statement about the truly abominable situation in Gaza and also the work we are doing to get students out who have the fully funded places in the UK and to provide them with that support. The only issue again I would say is, and this is something that the French government has raised many times, is the way in which the criminal gangs, the criminal smuggler gangs, use the potential to work in the UK as being a pull factor, as being an advertising, part of their advertising. And that is the challenge with the scenario that she sets out, is that that would make it even easier for the criminal gangs to be able to use that as part of their advertising and part of their reason to try and persuade people to part with their money and to make an incredibly dangerous journey across the Channel.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Stigmatising and dehumanising asylum seekers has stirred up race hate, thankfully by a small number, though, in our communities. And I'm really disturbed to see that racism perpetrated on the streets of York. However, I'm even more disturbed to hear that there are planned across the country assaults on asylum hotels, not least in York, where we have children and families staying. Could she set out what policing operations will be in place to protect those children and families from this hate and ensure their safety over the coming weeks?
Secretary.
I think my honourable friend is right to point out the
the dangers of some of the kind of divisive language, the dehumanising language towards other human beings, and to point out our shared humanity. And we can have disagreements with people, we can have views about the way in which systems should work, about the way in which rules should be enforced, and recognise there will be people who need to be returned because they have no right to be in the UK, but also we can avoid the kind of demonising language that ends up escalating tensions or promoting hatred and violence, something that we in this country should never do.
Louis French.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary today has described the people smugglers as criminals and the boat crossings as illegal. Does she therefore agree with me that those 29,000 individuals that have entered this country illegally from France this year should be classified as lawbreakers, and therefore those lawbreakers should at least be deported straight away or be banned from claiming asylum in the future?
Madam Secretary.
So the laws on illegal entry go right back to, I think, 1972. There's been a long-standing issue around illegal entry. I would say to him, his previous government's policy was to claim that everybody was going to be returned to France or to Rwanda, where they ran the scheme for 2.5 years, and 4 volunteers were sent. So nobody was actually returned, and they never managed to return anybody to France. What we are being clear is that we believe where people arrive on dangerous boat crossings or illegal routes, actually they should be returned to France as part of that pilot scheme. We've set up the pilot scheme to develop this. We want to build it, but it is something that the previous government never managed to do. There's no point in their fantasy claims. We need practical steps, which is what we are doing with France.
Sir Jan Jersey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the hotels that is housing asylum seekers in Kent is the hotel in Ashford. The decision to house them was taken by the Conservatives when they were in power. Many people currently living there are going through appeal process. So I welcome the decision to speed up appealing processes. Will my honourable friend reassure me and my constituents that this government will end up the use of the Holiday Inn as asylum hotel as soon as possible?
I can assure him that we will end asylum hotels, including the asylum hotel in his constituency. Part of the way we need to do this is to clear the appeals backlog, and the reason for setting up the new independent appeals commission, is so that it can swiftly surge capacity if there are changes in the number of cases going to appeal, that they can actually respond much more quickly, and also to change some of the procedures so that they can do fast-track decision-making that can work then with returns for those who don't have a right to be in the UK.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
After the horrors of the last century, we pledged to protect people fleeing war and persecution. This included parents and their children, and today the asylum system is in chaos. This serves no one save those who peddle hatred. Border Force staff represented by the PCS union have produced a Safe Routes report outlining how a Ukrainian-style visa system would prevent deaths in the Channel and stop the smuggling gangs overnight. Will she listen to officers on the front line who are seeking to deliver a practical and a humane solution to the present chaos?
Well, what I would say to the honourable member is the whole principle behind the France pilot that we want to build and grow is that people can apply through a legal process, go through proper security checks as well, but we will return people who come on these dangerous small boats facilitated by criminal gangs. Those principles, I think, are really important, that we want a system that can better return those who are being exploited by criminal gangs, undermine their business model, and who are using illegal entry. But alongside that, we do what our country has always done through history, which is to provide the legal processes controlled and managed to be able to support those who have fled persecution and conflict. It's what happened as part of the Ukraine scheme. It's what we will now seek to do as part of a refugee approach to students, and it's what we need to do to have a proper system across the board that does both things, that looks at dealing with the control, bringing more control into a chaotic system, and also having something that is true to our historic values.
Clive Efford.
Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today, and can I commend her for the way she's working with our neighbouring countries to try and deal with this problem. The approach of the previous government was basically to stand on the cliffs of Dover and shout abuse across the Channel and tell the Conservatives that they should keep all refugees and we would take none. So if we're going to provide a solution to this problem, it has to come from the sort of cooperation that she has been working on. And does she agree?
Secretary.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. Frankly, we saw what happened under the previous government, and we saw also the system that we had inherited, where they made grand but empty claims about where people were going to be returned to, but then had none of the agreements, nothing workable in place to actually do it, and then instead just had people stuck potentially indefinitely in the asylum system, which would have meant increasing numbers of asylum hotels. In contrast, what we have done already is a 28% increase in returns of failed asylum seekers and put in place the foundations for building a new approach with France and with other European countries. I think most people recognise the complexity of this issue rather than the sort of a fantasy promise approach which just ends up undermining trust.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Home Secretary accept that some of the UK's adversaries are seeking to weaponise illegal migration? And does she share my concern of the growing nexus between malign state actors and non-state actors, such as the criminal gangs that she's mentioned today? And if she accepts that collaboration and malevolent cooperation is going on, that it is a national security threat, and as such, that even though there'll be more powers, counter-terrorism powers under the new bill for the National Crime Agency, which I welcome, there also should be more collaboration between the Security Service and the National Crime Agency.
Madam Secretary.
Can I agree with the points that the honourable member has made? The Prime Minister said early last year that border security is a national security issue. He is right about that. He is also right that we see malign forces attempt to exploit and undermine border security, and also he's also right to talk about the interaction sometimes between malign state-backed threats and also organised immigration crime. Why we already have growing cooperation between the intelligence and security agencies and also the National Crime Agency that looks at some of these smuggler gang threats and routes and have pursued further issues there, and are also looking at strengthened checks that we may be able to do at our borders. It also strengthens the argument for the international cooperation with other law enforcement and intelligence and security agencies as well.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In a previous life, I worked on the Turkey-Greece returns deal, a deal that returned refugees that had crossed in small boats from Turkey to the Greek islands in return for properly registered asylum seekers in Turkey. As we all know, that deal drastically reduced the number of small boats that crossed into Turkey. Does the Home Secretary think that the UK's deal with France, negotiated just last month, is already having a deterrent effect, and might that be connected to the smallest number of crossings in August since 2019 that we've seen?
Well, my honourable friend is right that the crossings in August were the lowest for several years, although there was the same level of crossing days as last summer. People also know there's a lot of different factors involved, and we have been seeking with France as well to get the implementation of their maritime review to also be able to do stronger interventions. But I welcome the point that he made about the Greece-Turkey deal, because that did have a very significant impact on those crossings, and it's why we believe it is the right thing to do to pursue this cooperation with France, and I welcome the work that the French government has done to support this pilot agreement on returns.
Josh Babarinde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As an Eastbourne boy born and bred, I am a proud Englishman. And in his St George's Day speech in 1933, Winston Churchill said that his England was one where no one would think of persecuting a man on account of his religion or his race. Does the Home Secretary agree with Winston Churchill, that our country and our flag represent unity and tolerance? And does she agree with me that those who attempt to divide our communities in the name of our flag are no patriots of Churchill's England, no patriots of today's England, and no patriots of our great country?
Secretary.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend about the importance of patriotism that brings our country together. That is what our flags symbolise, that is what our values as a country symbolise. Obviously, the Union Jack is in itself a coming together in its very embodiment as a flag, but also the St George's flag for those of us representing English constituencies that are proud to fly the St George's flag and so proud to stand up for the values and the shared description that he has, the patriotism around those English values as well as those British values that are about coming together, about fairness, about decency, about respect. That is what we do. It's why we all want an ordered system that criminal gangs can't exploit because we respect the rule of law, but it's also why we should never discuss any of these issues in a way that promotes hate and division. That is not the kind of country we are.
Sonia Kumar.
Madam Deputy Speaker, at the start of this summer, I welcome the government's decisive action in sanctioning Chinese companies involved in manufacturing and supplying boats used by criminal gangs to facilitate dangerous channel crossings. Disrupting these supply chains is a vital part of smashing the gangs. Can my right honourable friend update the House on what discussions she's had with international counterparts to coordinate efforts in targeting these companies and ensuring that these sanctions are enforced globally?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right to welcome the Foreign Secretary's introduction of sanctions around criminal smuggler gangs. It's the first time that this has been done. And we also have extensive cooperation with the National Crime Agency with Iraq, for example. We have massively strengthened the cooperation because we know that there are Iraqi Kurdish gangs that are operating in northern France and where we have recently signed a new agreement with Iraq. With Turkey, with Bulgaria, with Belgium, with France, with different countries, and crucially with Germany, that is going to be changing the law in order to help us go after the criminal gangs and their supply chains. The work that is being done to disrupt supply chains is having an impact. It is significant, too, that we are seeing not only the disruptions and arrests internationally as well as in the UK, we are also seeing fewer boats physically crossing, but instead the criminal gangs are resorting to overcrowding those boats instead.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I note that the appeal court judges in last Thursday's judgment were using Article 8 of the ECHR as a reason why the interim injunction on the Bell Hotel should be quashed. Yet the Home Secretary in her statement today has been arguing that she wants to alter the interpretation of that same Article 8. Wouldn't a much better and more quicker and more effective route would be that one argued by the Shadow Home Secretary this afternoon to simply disapply all immigration matters from the European Court of Human Rights?
Secretary.
Well, I think that's not what, as my understanding, is not what his front bench is arguing, and is only arguing about the Human Rights Act, risking there actually being more issues around the domestic courts not being able to take decisions before things go to the European courts. But I'll leave that for his own wrangling within his party about what their position is. What I would say about the we do think that there needs to be reforms around the way in which Article 8 is interpreted. I think the way in which too many cases around family rules are being treated as exceptions that are not that higher level of decision making can't be exceptional if you're talking about so many cases being treated as exceptions. It means that what we need to look at is the rules themselves and also having much greater clarity about the way in which we believe those rules should be interpreted and the way in which family migration should be interpreted in the courts.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Much has been said about the role of the European Convention on Human Rights, and it appears that the party of Churchill is seeking to abandon his legacy in their lurch towards the right, just as there is a growing consensus amongst European nations that we need to modernise it for today's times. Does the Home Secretary agree that Britain should be part of leading that change rather than leaving and turning us into Belarus or Russia?
Secretary.
Well, we do have a strong history of leading around international standards, around international legal frameworks. Of course, laws and the way in which they're interpreted need to move with the times and need to keep up to date with the new challenges, including in a world of mass communications. We face very different kinds of challenges than maybe 20 years ago or 50 years ago or more. But he is also right to say that the UK has always played that leading role in defining those standards and in making sure that other countries do abide by international laws, and actually we lose out and don't get the kind of international cooperation that we need if what we try and do is just rip up that international law and cooperation.
Chris Coughlin.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud that this country helps refugees, and I'm intensely proud that I spent years building a charity with a Rwandan refugee from the genocide. But in my constituency, there have been 2 serious criminal incidents in Hawley in the last 3 months in relation to the 4 Points Hotel. My constituents do have legitimate safety concerns, and although the police have acted promptly, what steps is the Home Secretary taking to ensure the 4 Points Hotel is closed as an asylum hotel as soon as possible?
Well, the honourable member makes an important point. We want all asylum hotels to close, including in his constituency. We need to do that in a controlled and orderly manner as well. But I think what we also need to do is to strengthen the arrangements to ensure that the law is enforced and that rules are enforced, that public safety considerations are also taken seriously as part of the management of the whole asylum and immigration system. And it's why we are developing new partnerships between policing, immigration enforcement and the Home Office and asylum accommodation providers. It's immensely important there is proper shared information and also stronger arrangements to make sure that wherever criminality is found, it is properly and swiftly tackled.
Oliver Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Shadow Home Secretary, the former Immigration Minister, has some brass neck, do we not think, Home Secretary? He opened so many hotels, I thought he was going to overtake Lenny Henry as the frontage of Premier Inn at one stage. My constituents are so fed up with this, and I'm glad she's taking it so seriously, getting the numbers down. While we're doing everything we can to get these numbers down, does she agree with me that everyone involved in this debate, and particularly politicians, shouldn't incite or encourage the sort of aggression and actually sheer racism that we've seen, some actually directed towards our brave police officers over the summer? Thank you.
Home Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right that the previous government, including the Shadow Home Secretary when he was Immigration Minister, was responsible for a huge increase in asylum hotels and presided over a tenfold increase in small boat crossings as well. The important thing now is to make sure that we can end asylum hotels and make sure that we can bring back control into the system. But as we do so, we should make sure that we don't have divisive or hateful rhetoric or anything that particularly that promotes violence against police officers or within communities, which is always a disgrace.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary is right to talk about tackling push and pull factors, something which, when we're in government, we worked towards tackling, despite challenges, bringing forward the use of third countries. Because you both need a deterrent, but you also need a place to send people who we don't have returns agreements with their country of origin, or we don't know. Now, it's no surprise to me, our arrivals have increased since that scheme was scrapped. I understand there's a period of reset happening in Downing Street at the moment, so how long before we can expect her to come to the dispatch box to talk about a third country scheme that she'll be introducing?
Home Secretary.
Well, obviously what this government has managed to do is to get the agreement with France in place, that pilot agreement that we seek to build. France obviously is not the country where most of the people passing through started from, so it is effectively a third country agreement that we have already put in place and are now working to implement on a pilot basis. We're also working with other European countries to explore returns hubs as well. But what we don't think is the right thing to do is to have an incredibly expensive programme that sent just 4 volunteers, and during the 2.5 years, 2 years plus that it was in operation, ended up costing £700 million, while 84,000 people arrived in the UK.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Peterborough is a proud and generous place and has welcomed many people to our doors over the generations. And I'd like to put on tribute by thanks to the churches, mosques and community groups which are looking after and welcoming people. But people are getting fed up with a system that is broken and was broken before my honourable friend became the Home Secretary. So many people in my constituency will welcome the record deportations, the focus on Article 8 and making efficiency and driving forward the system. But to be honest, the biggest issue in my constituency remains the hotel that was opened by Serco with no consultation with the police or the council before it happened. Can my right honourable friend assure me that she will make sure that there is no single bureaucratic block, no stone she will not move to get the Dragonfly Hotel closed as soon as possible as part of fixing this rotten, broken system?
Well, we have made clear that we need to end all asylum hotels, including the hotel in my honourable friend's constituency. It's actually because we believe in the long history that the UK has of helping those who have fled persecution and conflict in an ordered way, is why we also need to get control and fix the chaos that we inherited, including ending asylum hotels that are undermining confidence in the whole system and were introduced exactly because the previous government lost control over the system. That is what now needs to be turned around, and that is the foundations that we are putting in place.
Ben Opsajecti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. She's touched on this a couple of times already, but I'm yet to hear from the Secretary of State about the scope of the government's asylum accommodation programme, which is currently rated at amber. Despite over 29,003 asylum seekers arriving by small boat alone so far this year, the scope of this programme will only see the creation of 5,000 bed spaces by the end of 2026, spread across 3 accommodation pilots following its strategic refresh. In what locations will the 3 accommodation pilots be? How many bed spaces for asylum seekers will be in each, and at what stage gate is each one?
So, we are developing alternative approaches to asylum accommodation, including working with local councils that have come forward and also including working with other government departments. We will provide an update as well as we make progress and do so. But I think there's the 2 things that need to happen together. There's obviously the shift to alternative sites that has to follow value for money tests, because that was the mistake that I think was often made in the past, and not having the proper assessments in place, as the Public Accounts Committee identified, but also making sure that we reduce the numbers of people in the asylum accommodation system overall. Because if we don't reduce the numbers in the system, simply moving the problem around from place to place won't solve it and won't get it back under control.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ensuring we have a humane and functioning asylum and immigration system needs competence, credibility and compassion. And I welcome the credible plan that this government has put in place. Our approach also has to be holistic, and part of that is also tackling the root causes of displacement, conflict and persecution. The Home Secretary has touched on how we're working with other countries. Could she also talk about how she's working cross-government and internationally to also address these drivers of displacement?
Secretary.
Can I welcome the honourable member's point here, because she's absolutely right that any comprehensive, effective approach internationally, not just here in the UK, needs to look at the causes and the drivers of mass migration, of people who have fled persecution and conflict, but also some of the economic migration issues that have also caused significant challenges. The Foreign Secretary and I have set up a joint migration team to work closely on some of these issues, and the Foreign Secretary has also made issues around migration a key priority for the Foreign Office. This is clearly an important cross-government issue where we are working together.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When Labour was in opposition, it attacked the Conservatives for the small number of asylum seekers who would be removed to Rwanda as part of the Tory deterrent. Now the Conservatives are in opposition. They're attacking Labour for the small number of asylum seekers who will be removed to France as part of the Labour deterrent. Does the Secretary of State accept that for a deterrent to work, people considering this dangerous crossing need to know that it may be in vain?
Home Secretary.
Well, we have established the agreement with France as a pilot agreement, and we want to develop and expand it. It allows us to detain people immediately on arrival at Dover at Western Jet Foyle in order to then be returned. The first cases have been referred to France, and we expect the first returns to start during the course of this month. But I think there's also, as well as the impact in terms of undermining the criminal business model of the gangs, the deterrence issues that he talked about, there's also a really important principle here, which is for people arriving illegally on dangerous boats where they pay criminal gangs should be returned, but people should also then who apply through a legal route and then go through proper security checks, the UK should do its bit in a controlled and managed way and a capped way alongside other countries.
Julie Minns.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary's statement, and can I strongly welcome the enforcement action recently taken by UK Border Force, Cumbria Police and local trading standards in cracking down on illegal trading and illegal working in retail in my Carlisle constituency. Will the Home Secretary reassure my constituents that there will be no let-up in this enforcement activity and that the same rigour will be applied to migrant workers working as delivery riders?
Can I also welcome the law enforcement work in my honourable friend's constituency, and this is why we have set up a domestic organised immigration crime task force to be able to work across different police forces into those networks that are exploiting illegal working, that often have networks into all kinds of other organised crime as well, that undermine communities, that undermine town centres and also exploit individuals and undermine border security. We are strengthening that domestic work, which had never been done before as a result of some of the report by the Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Policing.
Wendy Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Under the watch of this Home Secretary, the fact is 2025 has been the worst year on record for small boat crossings. And whilst the government claims it wants to end the use of asylum hotels, the Right Honourable Lady is not telling us when, and so I'd like some reassurance today that she will not, as a result of this, we will not see an increase in HMOs or the use of local houses or local flats to rent for these particular individuals, nor will we see any increase of costs to local councils.
Home Secretary.
Well, unfortunately, the position that we inherited from the previous government that her front bench wants to go back to actually had the freeze on asylum decisions and would have left us with tens of thousands more people in asylum hotels. We will end asylum hotels over the course of this Parliament, but we need to do it not simply by moving people to different kinds of accommodation, and I do think that is an important point, but also by reducing the overall size of the asylum system. If we don't reduce the overall size of the asylum system, because their policies were doing the opposite, they were increasing it, then actually we will never solve this problem or rebuild the confidence of the people across the UK.
Isbana Begum.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the East End of London, we have a proud history of welcoming refugees and migrants, many fleeing war and persecution. Yet we've seen over recent years and months the political and media establishment complicit in the normalisation of Islamophobia and anti-migrant rhetoric, with campaigns targeting asylum seekers outside hotels over the summer and resorting to violent aggression, including yesterday in my constituency. This is putting all of us at risk. Could the Home Secretary say exactly what she will do to ensure that asylum seekers, refugees, migrants and all those who live in my constituency can live safely from attempts, including organised by the far right, to create fear and division in our area?
Home Secretary.
Well, everyone has a right to be safe, everyone has a right to respect, and the pursuit of division and hatred and violence is never acceptable, both as part of the immigration and asylum system, but also more widely across our country. It's hugely important that alongside all of the reforms we introduce, because we do need reforms to the system, we also have a clear recognition of the importance of our shared humanity and the importance of preventing any kind of violence, hatred or the kinds of tensions and problems that she describes.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With crossings up over 40% this year alone at some 30,000, clearly the government's current policies are acting as a magnet, not a deterrent. So when will the Home Secretary realise that the only effective deterrent is to detain and deport everybody who comes here illegally, and to do that we must leave the European Convention on Human Rights?
Secretary.
Well, this government has increased the returns of those who have no right to be here since the election, including a 28% increase in returns of failed asylum seekers. We're strengthening enforcement and bringing in new counter-terrorism powers to go after the criminal gangs, counter-terrorism powers that incomprehensibly his party has voted against and seems to be opposing the action that we need to go after the criminal gangs. If he would support them, if the Conservatives would support them, we could bring those powers in swiftly in the course of a few months and give our law enforcement the powers to take stronger action against those criminal gangs. And I hope he would support the agreement with France as well that does provide for the immediate detention of people arriving in the UK and returning them also to France as well. The trouble with his party's policies is, frankly, they sound an awful lot like the last Conservative government's policies that totally failed. And so whilst the previous Conservative government was chaos, his party just seems to be chaos on steroids. They're not trying to solve the problem. All they're trying to do is exploit it. What we need is a properly controlled and managed system that goes after the criminal gangs who should not be able to get away with their vile trade.
Alex McIntyre.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Gloucester has a proud history of being a welcoming and diverse city, and just last week I was pleased to attend the Ukrainian Independence Day celebrations in my constituency with some of those who have sought refuge in our city. But many of my constituents have written to me, particularly those who live next door to the asylum hotel that was opened by the last Conservative government, with legitimate concerns about the future of that site and the impact of things like protests on their front doorsteps. So can she reassure my constituents that the policies that she's announced today will speed up the closure of that hotel as for use for asylum seekers? And will she meet with me to discuss the impact of those sites on local residents in Gloucester?
Secretary.
Well, I can tell my honourable friend that we will end asylum hotels, we will close asylum hotels that the previous government opened, including in his constituency, and it is hugely important that we do so. He is right to talk about the long history of people right across the country, including the more than 100,000 families who came forward to offer homes to Ukrainians at the beginning of Putin's war and invasion of Ukraine. And that spirit, those values are immensely important, but people need to know that the system is being properly controlled and managed and that misuse is being tackled, and that's why it's so important to end asylum hotels.
Lewis Cocking.
Deputy Speaker, it is clear that the government has lost control. The government are going against their own election manifesto by taking it through the courts. So I've asked before with no answer, so I'll ask again. Can the Home Secretary give me a date when the hotel in my constituency of Broxbourne will close to illegal asylum seekers?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have been clear. We will end the asylum hotels that were opened by the previous government, and we will close those asylum hotels. And hopefully, if he can support the reforms that we will introduce on the appeal system so we can speed those back through Parliament and clear the backlog, I hope he will support the increase in decision-making that we have had to introduce after his party froze decision-making and created
a soaring backlog that would have increased the numbers of people in hotels, and I hope he would support the Border Security and Asylum Bill that is currently passing through the House of Lords, passing through the other place, because that would bring in stronger counter-terrorism powers to be able to go after the criminal gangs who are organising small boats in the first place, which sadly his party is still opposing.
Lewis Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We must stop criminal gangs from launching illegal crossings at source from the French coast. So could the Home Secretary update us on this conversation she's having with the French authority to ensure that their tactics include intervening in shallow waters to stop as many of these boats at source as possible?
Well, the French government has been undertaking the maritime review. It is something that the Interior Minister has also been pursuing very strongly in order to ensure that there can be intervention in French waters. Currently what's happening, we've seen the small boats, the criminal gangs operate these taxi boat tactics to load people onto the boats in shallow waters, and some of the disgraceful scenes that we have seen as a result. And that maritime review is looking at ways instead to be able to intervene in shallow waters and to be able to prevent the boat crossings in the first place. This is alongside the extension of the Compagnie de Marche, additional patrols along French beaches, which has been agreed, and also the new judicial prosecution unit in Dunkirk, which is now working very closely with the Border Security Command as part of the important foundations to strengthen law enforcement.
Jim Allister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whatever the promised tinkering with Article 8, the reality is that this government, or any government, will only get a grip on the out-of-control illegal immigration by quitting the ECHR. I agree that Article 8 is a problem, but the answer is Article 58, which is the one that allows the government to serve notice that it's leaving the ECHR. And unless and until it does that, we're not going to solve this problem. Could I ask the Home Secretary this? How does she hope to sort out this mess while her every action is subject to the foreign stipulations and ultimately the foreign court that is diligently applying the very ECHR to which she clings? Isn't that mean we go round endlessly in a circle? And when it comes to the appeal panels, will they be subject to judicial review, where again the ECHR can be relied on?
Right.
Well, the fact of having international law and abiding by it has helped us to get new agreements in place to be able to return people who arrive by small boats, and is also helping us work with other European countries on returns hubs to increase returns as well. I do think there is a problem with the way in which Article 8 is being interpreted in the courts. That's why I have been clear that reforms are needed, and we will bring forward that as part of a major package of reforms to the asylum system before the end of this year.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Conservatives and Reform appear to be engaged in competitive populism, and one of the consequences of that is opportunism. And in that light, does my right honourable friend agree that it's surprising that they pose as the party on the side of local democracy when it comes to asylum hotels? Can she confirm not only did the current Shadow Home Secretary decide in March 2020 to suspend the practice of consulting local authorities before opening asylum hotels in their area, but that the practice remained suspended for the rest of the time they were in government, even after the emergency of the pandemic ended?
Home Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right that not only did the the Shadow Home Secretary lift the responsibilities to consult local authorities, he also voted against amendments put forward by the Labour opposition at the time to strengthen the work with local authorities. This government is strengthening that work with local authorities. Instead, all the Shadow Home Secretary and the Shadow Justice Secretary seem to do is chase each other around chasing each other's tails to try and get to the next photo opportunity first, or to chase the honourable member for Clacton as well. It's just more chaos from the parties opposite.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's not populist to want safe and secure communities. But the only way we're going to solve this crisis, we're going round in circles, is to withdraw from outdated refugee conventions, to rescind the insidious ECHR from our own laws, and to use British military assets to prevent incursion in British waters. That is the only way we're going to solve this crisis. And will the Home Secretary commit to doing that today?
Home Secretary.
Well, I'll just point out to the honourable member opposite that his party was in power for a period of 8 years in which criminal gangs were able to take hold along the borders, in which they were able to undermine our border security. Frankly, it should be governments, not gangs, that decide who enters our country. And what we need is to have the counter-terrorism powers to go after those criminal gangs that, frankly, he and his party are still voting against. Shameful.
Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, it cannot be denied that we have inherited a very difficult position, and that recently there's been a real increase in the rhetoric, which is causing serious worry, upset, anger and mistrust in our communities. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, many vital measures to tackle this organised crime, like counter-terrorist style powers against gangs, a new offensive engagement at sea, banning sex offenders from the asylum system and powers to search phones are stuck in the Border Security Bill. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that if the Tories and Reform were really serious about these changes, they would stop voting against and organising against this bill and put their constituents and my constituents in Portsmouth North at the heart of this and let us put this bill in force?
My honourable friend is exactly right. The Tories and Reform could start working with us tomorrow to speed up the passage of this crucial legislation that would give our law enforcement counter-terrorism powers to go after smuggler gangs, that would mean new offences, that would mean they could download and search the mobile phones of people arriving on small boats, and would mean, crucially, that they could ban sex offenders from the asylum system altogether. You'd think that the parties opposite would support this. Instead, they have been blocking it. It's shameful.
Cameron Thomas.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our country should be proud that in the 1930s we welcomed 10,000 Jewish children from Europe upon the Kinder transports. Alas, our predecessors would not countenance bringing across their parents, and we know that the cost of that decision was that those parents were massacred in the Holocaust. There has always been vocal opposition to migration in this country, but I remind the government that responsibility lies with them. Across our country today, thousands of vulnerable refugees are afraid. They are afraid of the rise in right-wing activity and in right-wing rhetoric. Rhetoric this government has flirted with. I invite the government not to follow the Conservative Party or Reform UK into the abyss and to treat this issue with the compassion it deserves.
Secretary.
Well, the honourable member refers to the Kinder transport as well as the important support for children there. The UK also took Jewish orphaned children from concentration camps and provided them a home, important future in the UK as well. And we have a long history of supporting those who have fled persecution and conflict. But that is exactly why it's so important that the system needs to be properly managed and controlled. That's why it's so important that we tackle the chaos that we've inherited. It's why it's so important that we strengthen our border security as well, in order to restore confidence in the very system and the very values that he describes that are so important. This government will never pursue the kinds of violence promoting rhetoric that can cause such division. We will always be responsible and serious about the practical steps that need to be taken to deal with the chaos we inherited.
Paul Moore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I warmly welcome the Home Secretary's statement today, particularly the UK-France migrant deal, which provides a safe and legal route for all those families genuinely fleeing persecution, but who play by the rules and want to enter the country legally. And also it balances that with the need to remove from this country and send back to France those who try to jump the queue in small boats. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Shadow Home Secretary suggested that the potential figure of 50 returns a week under this pilot scheme is not enough. So can the Home Secretary remind the House that under the last government there were 128,000 people who crossed the Channel, and of those, how many were returned to France? It wasn't 50 a week, it wasn't 100 a week, it was 0 a week, every week for 6.5 years.
My honourable friend is exactly right. The previous government made a whole series of grand but empty claims. They returned no one to France who arrived on the small boats. They had no agreement in place to do that, but they also sent no one to Rwanda other than 4 volunteers who were paid to go, because again and again, all they did was escalate the rhetoric and escalate the chaos rather than taking the practical steps to get the returns that we need.
Neil Shastrahurst.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in her statement, the Home Secretary set out that they would have an independent body to process asylum appeals. Well, that only works if it's delivered at pace, if it's resourced, and if it's well staffed. So can the Home Secretary set out when they will start recruiting arbitrators and support staff, when they will be operational at full health, will it operate 7 days a week, and if in a year's time we come back from next summer's recess and the immigration rates are higher than they were this year, will she take personal responsibility?
Madam Secretary.
Well, we're seeking accelerated legislation to bring in the new Independent Appeals Commission, and he will know that once legislation begins its passage through the House, it is then possible to start implementation and to make sure that we can invest in getting the adjudicators, the trained adjudicators, in place as well. So we will set out an update before the end of this year, both of the timetable and also the further details around how that appeals system will work. It obviously has to be fully independent from the Home Office and fully independent from the government, but it needs to be able to surge and respond swiftly in order to prevent huge backlogs growing up. I really hope that he and his party will be able to support this legislation, because then we can move through much more quickly and make sure that we can implement the new body much more quickly as well.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I forgot how much I enjoyed bobbing. I think we all want to be proud of the UK's asylum system, but because of the mess we inherited from the previous government, none of us are there right now, and I think that is just a fact. So I do thank the Home Secretary for the work she's doing, the quite methodical work to get a grip of the situation and get the system back on track. It really pains me, though, that some of the people who are behind this mess are now sitting opposite and are seeking to weaponise it, rather than apologising to the country. So does the Home Secretary share my hope that extending the Ukrainian visa scheme, the refugee student scheme, bringing Gaza students here and supporting those injured Gazan children is going to be a chance to show the UK immigration system at its best? Thank you.
Well, I hope the party opposite will support Gazan students being able to take up their places and scholarships in the UK, just as I hope they will also support the border security bill, which they are still opposing.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government appears to be conflating the terms illegal immigrant and asylum seeker. The UK has rightly in the past taken in asylum seekers, including Ukrainians who have been fleeing persecution, but these are different to those crossing the Channel illegally, the vast majority of whom are men aged 20 to 30 with no children or families appearing to cross with them. So I've got 3 questions for the Home Secretary. First one, does she agree with the Prime Minister's comments that the UK has plenty of housing to accommodate illegal immigrants? Will she rule out the use of houses of multiple occupation, and will she rule out the use of social housing for illegal immigrants?
Home Secretary.
Well, I would say to the honourable member, given what he said about crossings, I hope he would support the French pilot agreement that we have in place, which means we can return people who make these dangerous or illegal journeys so that we can return them to France, but in exchange we also have a legal process for people who apply properly, who follow the rules and who go through security checks. We've been clear that the way to tackle the chaos in the asylum system is to end asylum hotels, but to do so as well by reducing the overall number of people in the asylum accommodation system, and that includes sorting out the appeals chaos we inherited from his party.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Respect for each other and respect for the rule of your law. The Home Secretary was right to emphasise those as fundamental British values, and they're underpinned by our robust human rights framework, which underscores and protects individual liberties. Winston Churchill knew that, which is why he was such a supporter of the ECHR after World War II. So will the Home Secretary do all she can to protect our human rights framework from those on the opposition benches who would tear it up for a cheap headline by campaigning as hard as she can to make sure that the ECHR is fit for the 21st century and can restore public confidence?
Madam Secretary.
My honourable friend is right that we do need reforms, but we also need to recognise that international law can help underpin international cooperation. The criminal gangs operate across borders and exploit the fact that too often governments don't operate across borders and law enforcement doesn't operate across borders in order to go after them. So that's why we need that international cooperation in place, underpinned by legal framework.
Caroline Verdon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The national conversation on immigration and asylum is being dominated loudly by colleagues in this place who have a sorry track record of stirring up division, dehumanising people who are seeking sanctuary from some of the world's harshest regimes and conflicts, and many of my constituents raised their fears with me this summer. As immigration has soared since we left the European Union, would the Home Secretary agree with me that the architects of the damaging Brexit campaign are probably the least likely people to have the answer to the small boat crossings, and that we must do all we can to emphasise the benefits and value that migrants bring to the UK, as they have done for centuries?
Madam Secretary.
Well, it is the case that the Conservative Party in government managed to also both create the chaos in the asylum system, let criminal gangs take over along our borders, but also saw legal migration quadruple in the space of just 4 years. Immigration has always been an important part of our history, but that is also why it needs to be properly controlled and managed in a fair and sensible way. That hasn't happened too often in the past, but it needs to do so also in a way that is serious and respectful to other people, to make sure that we as a country come together at the same time as making sure there are proper controls in the system.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement? And does the Home Secretary accept that the frustration that many feel about illegal immigration must not ever be confused with the opinion of those who come and add to our society in the NHS, in agriculture or many other jobs in which we rely on help from foreign nationals? And will the Home Secretary not accept that the route to the UK from the Republic of Ireland through Northern Ireland is feeding that frenzy? And will the Home Secretary finally, rightfully, block the current loopholes and close the backdoor access from the Republic of Ireland to the United Kingdom? Thank you.
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right that people have long supported people coming to work in our NHS, coming through legal routes. Those do also have to be controlled and managed, and the way in which legal migration quadrupled under the previous government, I think, was a serious problem, and that is why we are bringing legal migration down. That's why we put that in the immigration white paper. But he's also right that some of the most serious concerns are about these dangerous and illegal boat crossings that are underpinned and facilitated by criminal gangs. He raises the separate issue around Ireland and Northern Ireland, but he will know that the Common Travel Area is a long-standing part of our history. It's a long-standing part of our arrangements. We do have close security cooperation with the Irish government and with Irish law enforcement for exactly that reason, but it is also an important part of the arrangements and the close relationship between our countries.
That concludes the statement, and can I thank the Home Secretary and members for their time. The Home Secretary's been on her feet for around 2.5 hours, and we've had over 80 backbench contributions. We'll now give the House a few moments to settle and for the front benches to swap over.